When I married David Mitchell 3 years ago, I thought I was getting the fairy tale I'd always dreamed of. He was successful, charming, and came with what I believed was just an added blessing: his 8-year-old daughter, Emma. I was naive enough to think that love would be enough to blend our family together seamlessly. The wedding was beautiful, intimate, with just close family and friends. Emma was my flower girl, looking absolutely adorable in her lavender dress that matched my bridesmaids. She smiled for all the photos, threw petals down the aisle with enthusiasm, and even hugged me when David and I exchanged vows. I remember thinking in that moment that I was not just gaining a husband, but a daughter too. Our honeymoon in Tuscany was perfect, just David and me, walking through vineyards and talking about our future. We discussed how we'd raise Emma together, how we'd give her siblings, how we'd create the warm, loving home that every child deserves. David spoke about how Emma needed a mother figure in her life, how her biological mother had abandoned them when Emma was just 3 years old, leaving nothing but a note and empty promises to stay in touch. "She has been through so much," David said, holding my hand as we watched the sunset over Florence. "You are exactly what she needs, Sarah. You are going to be the mother she never had." Those words filled my heart with such purpose. I was going to be the perfect stepmother. I was going to heal this little girl's wounds, and give her all the love she'd been denied. The first few months of marriage were an adjustment period, which I expected. Moving into David's sprawling house in the suburbs meant learning new routines, understanding Emma's schedule, and finding my place in their established dynamic. David traveled frequently for his consulting business, sometimes for weeks at a time, which meant Emma and I had plenty of time to bond, or so I thought. Emma was polite, but distant. She'd say please and thank you when I made her breakfast, or helped with homework, but there was a wall between us that I couldn't seem to break through. When I suggested we have movie nights or bake cookies together, she'd agree with a shrug but never showed enthusiasm. I told myself it was normal, she was protecting herself, and it would just take time. David, however, began showing his true colors much sooner than I expected. "She is not warming up to you at all, is she?" he said one evening after Emma had gone to bed. We were cleaning up the dinner dishes, and I'd just mentioned how quiet she'd been during our meal. "It takes time," I replied, trying to sound optimistic. "She has been through a lot. I just need to be patient." David dried a plate with more force than necessary. "Sarah, you need to understand something. You will never be her real mother. You can try all you want, but that bond, that is something you just can't manufacture." His words stung, but I brushed them off as frustration. Maybe he was just as worried about Emma's adjustment as I was. But the comments continued, growing more frequent and more cutting. When I'd spend my Saturdays taking Emma to soccer practice, David would say, "Don't think that driving her around makes you her mom. Any babysitter could do that." When I'd help her with art projects or read bedtime stories, he'd remind me, "She is just being polite. You don't actually mean anything to her." When I'd plan special outings to the zoo or museums, hoping to create positive memories, David would undermine them. "She is only going because I told her to. You can't buy her love, Sarah." The worst part was that he said these things in front of Emma. I'd catch her looking between us during these moments, her young face confused and tense. I started to realize that David wasn't just being insensitive, he was actively sabotaging any chance Emma and I had of connecting. But I persevered. I told myself that David was wrong, that he was perhaps threatened by the idea of sharing his daughter's affection. I continued showing up for Emma in every way I could. I packed her lunches with little notes, attended every school event, volunteered to help with her class parties, and made sure she had everything she needed for her extracurricular activities. I even learned to braid her thick curly hair the way she liked it, watching YouTube tutorials late at night and practicing on my own hair until I got it right. When she complimented my braiding skills, I felt like I'd won a small victory. The dynamic in our house was strange and tense. When David was home, Emma would barely acknowledge me, often going straight to her room after school, and only emerging for dinner. But when David traveled, which was about half the time, Emma seemed different. She'd linger in the kitchen while I cooked, sometimes asking about my day, or sharing small details about school. These moments gave me hope that maybe underneath it all, we were building something real. One evening, about 8 months into our marriage, David was away on a 2-week business trip to Seattle. Emma and I were having dinner together. I'd made her favorite spaghetti and meatballs. When she suddenly looked up from her plate. Sarah, she said quietly. Why does Daddy say those mean things about you? My heart stopped. I carefully set down my fork, trying to keep my voice steady. What do you mean, sweetheart? He tells me things, she said, not meeting my eyes. He says you don't really love me, that you are just pretending because you love him. He says if I get too close to you, you'll leave like my real mom did. The pain in her voice was unmistakable, and suddenly everything made sense. David wasn't just undermining me to me. He was poisoning his own daughter's mind against me. He was teaching her not to trust, not to open her heart, not to believe in the love I was genuinely offering. Emma, I said, reaching across the table to take her small hand, I want you to know that I love you completely. Not because of your daddy, but because of who you are. You are smart, funny, creative, and kind. I feel so lucky that I get to be part of your life. For the first time since I'd known her, Emma's eyes filled with tears. But what if you leave too? I am not going anywhere. I promised her. No matter what happens between your daddy and me, I will always care about you, always. That night was a turning point. Emma opened up to me in a way she never had before, sharing her fears about abandonment, her confusion about her biological mother's absence, and her desperate desire to have a complete family. We stayed up late talking, and for the first time, she hugged me goodnight without being prompted. When David returned from his trip, I was optimistic that he'd notice the change in Emma's demeanor, that he'd be happy to see us getting closer. Instead, he was furious. What did you do to her while I was gone? He demanded the night he got back, after Emma had gone to bed. We just talked, I said. She opened up to me about some things. David, you should be happy that she is learning to trust you. He interrupted. Sarah, you don't get it. She doesn't need another mother. She has me. She has always had me, and that is enough. You are just confusing her. She is 8 years old, I protested. She needs nurturing emotional support. From me, David snapped. Not from some woman who is playing house with my family. The next morning, I woke up to find David and Emma having breakfast together without me. When I joined them, the atmosphere was cold. Emma wouldn't look at me, and when I tried to engage her in conversation about her upcoming school presentation, David cut me off. Emma doesn't need help with that, he said firmly. She is perfectly capable of handling her own schoolwork. From that day forward, David made it his mission to re-establish the distance between Emma and me. He'd schedule special daddy-daughter activities during times when I'd normally spend with her. He'd dismiss my input on parenting decisions, making it clear that I was an outsider in their relationship. Most cruelly, he'd have private conversations with Emma that always resulted in her pulling away from me again. The pattern continued for months. Every time Emma and I would make progress, David would intervene. He'd remind her that I wasn't her real family, that their bond was special and shouldn't be diluted by including me. He'd tell her stories about how much better their life was before I came along, how simple and peaceful it used to be when it was just the two of them. I started to feel like I was going crazy. I'd have beautiful moments with Emma, helping her with a school project, teaching her to cook, having heart conversations, only to have David systematically destroy the trust we'd built. He was manipulating his own daughter's emotions, and I felt powerless to stop it. The breaking point came during Emma's 9th birthday party. I'd spent weeks planning it, coordinating with her friends' parents, ordering decorations in her favorite purple theme, and arranging for a professional princess party entertainer. Emma had been excited about it, helping me plan the details and talking about it every day. The party was a success. Emma was beaming, surrounded by friends, laughing at the entertainment, and clearly having the time of her life. But when it came time to blow out the candles, David made a speech that crushed my spirit completely. I want to thank everyone for celebrating Emma's special day, he said, his arm around his daughter's shoulders. Emma and I are so grateful for all the love and support from our real family and friends. This little girl means everything to me, and I'd do anything to protect her and make sure she knows she is loved. The emphasis on real family was deliberate and pointed. He was telling everyone at the party, including Emma, that I wasn't part of their inner circle. I was just the woman who happened to live in their house. Later that evening, as we cleaned up after the party, Emma came up to me with tears in her eyes. "I am sorry, Sarah," she whispered. "Daddy says I can't love you the way I love him because you might leave. He says if I love you too much and you go away, it will hurt too bad." My heart shattered. David was teaching his daughter to protect herself from love, to build walls instead of bridges, to fear emotional connection. He was damaging her ability to form healthy relationships, all because of his own need to control and possess. That night, I confronted David directly. "You are hurting your own daughter," I told him. "You are teaching her that love is dangerous, that she can't trust people who care about her. Can't you see what you are doing?" David's response was cold and calculating. "What I am doing is protecting her from getting attached to someone who is temporary. You think you are here forever. You think this marriage is going to last. Emma doesn't need to get hurt again when you inevitably realize that being a stepmom isn't the fairy tale you thought it would be. I am not going anywhere," I insisted. "I love you both. I want to build a life together. You love the idea of us," he said dismissively, "but you don't understand what it really means to be a mother. You never will because she is not yours. She'll never be yours." Over the following months, David's emotional abuse escalated. He'd criticize my parenting attempts in front of Emma, question my motivations for everything I did, and make me feel like an intruder in my own home. He'd schedule family activities without including me, take Emma on trips without asking if I wanted to join, and consistently remind both of us that their father-daughter bond was exclusive and sacred. The toll on my mental health was devastating. I began to doubt myself, wondering if David was right, if I was overstepping boundaries, if Emma would truly be better off without my interference. I started withdrawing from both of them, afraid that my presence was causing more harm than good. But even as I pulled back, I continued to fulfill my responsibilities as a step-parent. I made sure Emma's needs were met, that her school forms were signed, that she had clean clothes and healthy meals. I attended her soccer games and school concerts. Even when David made it clear that my presence wasn't wanted or needed, Emma began to mirror her father's coldness toward me. She'd accept my help with homework, with barely a thank you, ignore my attempts at conversation, and act as if I were invisible, unless she needed something specific. It was heartbreaking to watch this bright, loving child shut down emotionally, building the same walls that her father had taught her were necessary for survival. The final blow came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in November. I'd been married to David for almost 2 years, and the situation at home had become unbearable. Emma, now 9, had completely stopped engaging with me beyond basic politeness. David traveled more frequently, leaving me to manage the household and Emma's care while making it clear that I had no real authority or standing in the family. That Tuesday, David announced that he was leaving Faye not for a business trip, but permanently. "This isn't working," he said matter-of-factly, as if he were discussing a failed business venture. "Emma and I are going to move in with my mother in Portland. We need space, and honestly, Sarah, you need to find your own life, instead of trying to insert yourself into ours." I was stunned. "What about our marriage? What about the promises we made?" "I tried," he said, shrugging, "but you never understood that Emma and I are a package deal. You can't love one of us without accepting that we come first with each other. You were always trying to change that dynamic." "I was trying to be part of it," I protested. "I wanted to love Emma like my own daughter." "And that was your mistake," David said coldly. "She is not your daughter, she never will be, and I won't let you confuse her about that anymore." The next morning they were gone. David had packed their belongings while I was at work, and by the time I came home the house felt empty and hollow. Emma's room was stripped bare, her artwork removed from the refrigerator, her school photos taken from the mantle. It was as if she'd never existed in my life. David left no forwarding address, no way for me to contact Emma, no explanation for her about where they'd gone or why. He simply vanished from my life, taking with him the little girl I'd grown to love as my own. For weeks, I was devastated. I'd lost not just my husband, but the child I'd poured my heart into loving. I'd failed in my mission to be the perfect stepmother, and the rejection felt like a confirmation of every cruel thing David had ever said about my inadequacy. But as the initial shock wore off, anger began to replace sadness. David had manipulated both Emma and me, creating conflict where there could have been love, building walls where we could have built bridges. He damaged his own daughter's ability to trust and receive love, all to maintain his control over her. I hired a private investigator to find them, not to interfere, but to understand my legal options. What I learned was disturbing. David had moved Emma across state lines without proper notice, had enrolled her in a new school without updating her records, and had effectively kidnapped her from the life we'd built together. More importantly, I discovered something David didn't know I knew. In our state, stepparents who have lived with a child for more than 2 years have legal standing to petition for visitation rights, especially if they can demonstrate that a relationship with them is in the child's best interest. I spent months gathering evidence, photos of Emma and me together, documentation of my involvement in her school activities, testimony from teachers who'd observed our relationship, and records showing that I'd been her primary caregiver during David's frequent business trips. But the most powerful evidence came from an unexpected source. While packing up Emma's remaining belongings to put in storage, I found her old tablet hidden under her mattress. When I turned it on to reset it, before donating it, I discovered something that changed everything: voice recordings. Emma had been secretly recording conversations in our house for months, not out of malice, but out of confusion and fear. She'd been trying to understand why her father said such different things to her about me when I wasn't around, versus what she experienced with me directly. The recordings were devastating. There were hours of David telling Emma that I didn't really love her, that I was only pretending to care to make myself look good, that I would abandon her the same way her biological mother had. There were recordings of him coaching her on how to respond to me, instructing her to be polite but distant, warning her not to get too attached to someone who wasn't permanent. But most heartbreaking were the recordings of Emma talking to herself, practicing different ways to tell me she loved me, but never having the courage to say the words. She'd recorded herself crying after particularly harsh conversations with her father, whispering about how confused she felt, and how much she wished things could be different. In one recording, made just a week before they left, Emma spoke directly to the device, as if she were leaving me a message. "Sarah, if you ever find this, I want you to know that I love you so much. I wanted to tell you, but Daddy said it would hurt you if I said it because you are not my real mom. But you feel like my real mom. You make me feel safe and happy, and I don't understand why Daddy doesn't want us to love each other. I hope someday I can tell you for real." Listening to that recording, I cried harder than I had since David and Emma had left. This little girl had been carrying such a burden, caught between her natural desire to love and be loved and her father's manipulative restrictions on her heart. Armed with this evidence, I petitioned the court for visitation rights. My lawyer argued that David had engaged in parental alienation, deliberately damaging Emma's psychological well-being by interfering with her ability to form healthy attachments. The recordings were proof that Emma genuinely cared for me, and that David's behavior was harmful to her emotional development. The court ordered mediation, which meant David had to return to our state with Emma for legal proceedings. When I saw her for the first time in 6 months, my heart nearly broke. She looked thinner, sadder, more withdrawn than I'd ever seen her. When our eyes met across the courthouse hallway, she started to move toward me but stopped when David put a firm hand on her shoulder. During the mediation, David was confident and dismissive. He maintained that I had no legal standing, no real relationship with Emma, and no right to interfere with his parenting decisions. He painted me as an unstable woman who couldn't accept that I wasn't Emma's real mother, and who was causing trauma by trying to force an unnatural relationship. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "my daughter barely knows this woman. They lived in the same house, but there was no real bond. Sarah is having trouble accepting that her role in Emma's life was always temporary and peripheral." My lawyer asked for a private session with Emma, which the court granted. In that session, with just Emma, my lawyer, a court advocate, and me present, we played some of the recordings from Emma's tablet. When Emma heard her own voice talking about her love for me, her eyes filled with tears. When she heard the recordings of her father coaching her to be distant, her face crumpled with understanding. "Emma," the court advocate asked gently, "do you remember making these recordings?" She nodded, wiping her eyes. I was so confused. I felt one way, But Daddy told me I should feel a different way. I thought maybe I was wrong about my feelings. What did you feel? My lawyer asked. Emma looked directly at me for the first time since the proceedings began. I felt loved. Sarah made me feel safe and happy. She remembered things that were important to me, and she was always there when I needed help. But Daddy said I shouldn't feel that way because Sarah wasn't my real mom. And how do you feel now? The advocate continued. I miss her, Emma whispered. I missed her every day. I wanted to call her, but Daddy said it would be wrong. When we returned to the main mediation session, the tone had completely shifted. David's confidence evaporated when the mediator informed him that Emma had expressed a desire to maintain a relationship with me. The recordings had revealed the extent of his manipulation, and the court was now concerned about his fitness as a parent. Mr. Mitchell, the mediator said sternly, parental alienation is a serious form of child abuse. You have systematically interfered with your daughter's ability to form healthy attachments and have caused her significant emotional distress. This court finds that a relationship with Mrs. Mitchell is in Emma's best interest. David's facade of calm control crumbled. This is ridiculous, he spluttered. She is not Emma's mother. She has no rights here. On the contrary. My lawyer interjected. Step-parents who have acted in loco parentis for an extended period have established legal rights in this jurisdiction. Mrs. Mitchell has documented proof of her parental role in Emma's life for nearly 2 years. The final ruling granted me supervised visitation rights with Emma every other weekend and 1 evening per week. More importantly, the court ordered David to attend counseling to address his pattern of emotional manipulation, and required that Emma receive therapy to help her process the conflict she'd been forced to navigate. 6 months later, Emma and I were sitting in a park near the courthouse after one of our regular visits. She was pushing herself on a swing while I sat on a nearby bench, just enjoying the sound of her laughter. It had taken time, but she was beginning to open up again, to trust that our relationship was real and permanent. Sarah, she said, slowing the swing to look at me, can I ask you something? Of course, sweetheart. Why did you fight for me, even when Daddy said you shouldn't? I considered my answer carefully. Emma was now 10 years old enough to understand complex emotions but still young enough to need reassurance and security. Because love isn't something you can turn on and off like a light switch. I told her, when you love someone, really love them, you don't stop just because it becomes difficult or inconvenient. I love you, Emma, not because I am married to your father, or because I am supposed to, but because of who you are. That love doesn't disappear, just because someone tells me it should. She nodded seriously, processing this. I love you too, Sarah. I always did, even when I wasn't allowed to say it. I know, baby. I could feel it, even when things were hardest between us. Emma jumped off the swing and came to sit beside me on the bench. Will you always fight for me? Always, I promised her. No matter what happens, no matter where life takes us, I will always be here for you. That is what real love means, Faye. It doesn't give up. As we sat together in the afternoon sunshine, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. I'd learned that being a stepmother wasn't about being perfect or replacing someone else. It was about showing up consistently, loving without conditions, and fighting for what is right even when it is difficult. David had tried to teach Emma that love was conditional, temporary, and dangerous. But through our relationship, she was learning that love could be steady, dependable, and healing. She was learning that she deserved to be loved for exactly who she was, and that opening her heart to caring adults would enrich her life rather than threaten it. The court ordered therapy had helped Emma process her feelings about having multiple parental figures in her life. Her therapist had explained that having more people love her didn't diminish the love she shared with her father, Faye. It just meant she was fortunate to have a broader support system. David had initially resisted the court's rulings, but over time he'd begun to understand that his attempts to control Emma's affections had been harmful. The counseling had helped him recognize that his own abandonment issues from his ex-wife had led him to try to protect Emma by limiting her emotional investments. Slowly, he was learning to support Emma's relationship with me rather than sabotage it. Our family looked different now than I'd originally envisioned, but it was real and healthy in a way it had never been before. David and I weren't married anymore. Faye, the trust had been too damaged to repair Faye, but we were co-parenting Emma with the shared goal of her well-being. Emma now lived with her father during the week, and spent weekends and school breaks with me. She had her own room in both houses, and she'd learned that it was okay to love and be loved by both of us in different ways. She was thriving academically and socially, and most importantly, she was learning to trust her own feelings and instincts. Looking back, I realized that my original goal of being the perfect stepmother had been misguided. There was no perfect formula for blended families, no script to follow that would guarantee success. What mattered was showing up authentically, loving without expectations, and fighting for what was right, even when it was inconvenient. Emma taught me that sometimes the greatest gift you can give a child is simply refusing to give up on them. By fighting for our relationship, I'd shown her that she was worth fighting for, that her feelings mattered, and that real love Faye doesn't disappear just because someone says it should. As we walked back to my car that afternoon, Emma slipped her hand into mine. Faye, a simple gesture that represented years of healing and growth for both of us. Sarah, she said, I am glad you never stopped being my mom, even when everyone said you weren't supposed to be. I am glad too, sweetheart. I am glad too.